all the administrative impediments, not just different currencies, the geographic impediments, and the economic impediments. What I'd like to suggest is that we often have a tendency to focus on a certain subcategory of administrative barriers, and I understand why. They require a lot of attention if we're trying to work on those administrative barriers. But what I'd like to suggest is that taking a broad picture of what the impediments are to trade starts to expand the policy space in which we can move and the kinds of things that we can think of doing. Since this is very abstract, let me give you an example. I did a fairly busy example, but this is a one-slide summary of some work that I did for the government of Catalonia. Catalonia is the province within Spain that Barcelona is the capital of, and the Catalan government was very interested in its international competitiveness, so I did a little study for them. But one of the things that we ended up concluding was that there were opportunities both internationally and internally within Spain to address each category of barriers that I talked about on the previous slide. So cultural barriers, just to take an example. You know, one certainly doesn't want to tell a Catalan not to focus on the Catalan language as a major priority, not if you're not from Catalonia. But you can point out that there's some advantages to maintaining linguistic links with the rest of Spain, and particularly focusing on the parts of Spain with which there are particularly tight linguistic linkages, like Valencia. Or to take another example off this slide, administrative barriers. I asked the Catalans, given that their largest trading partner is actually Valencia, another Spanish province, rather than France, whether they'd ever thought of doing bilateral summits between the head of the Catalan government and the head of the Valencian government. None had happened up to that point. Geographically, one can think of all kinds of investments that even within Spain could be made to further increase within Spain integration. And then economically, there's a basic lack of even information about these kinds of flows that prevents them from becoming a major focus. So you may be wondering, why is he talking about globalization and giving us a within Spain example? I use this example because this suggests that even within a common polity, unified by a common national government, without all the barriers that we see between countries, when we start thinking broadly about the impediments to trade, we start to identify a lot of avenues for action, not all of which I think have been given adequate emphasis in the efforts that have been made to date. So this brings me to the conclusion of my second point. If the first point was about the glass being more empty than full, the second point is about not only do we understand why the glass is more empty than full, we can identify some of the things that might help us make the glass fuller. The last point that I want to come to, and I was supposed to provide a private sector perspective, so let me actually use an example to do this. The third point I'd say is that we have to think about the gains from trade more broadly than I think mainstream trade theory has done. And this probably reflects the fact that I'm an industrial organization economist rather than a trade economist, and also that I teach at a business school rather than an economics department. But let me first give you an example and then leave you with a broader set of messages that I think flow from that example. So the example has to do with TCS, which is the largest Indian software services firm. It's got about 170,000 employees currently. And apart from teaching at a business school, my other side job for the last 10 years is I've been strategy advisor to the CEO of TCS. So I go to Mumbai 6 or 8 times a year. This is an example I actually know pretty well, as opposed to something I read up. The particular example I want to focus on is not TCS overall, but TCS's investment in Latin America, which is the focus of this slide, and which picks up, I think, on themes around both trade and services and foreign direct investment, which is why it seemed like a good example to work through. So a couple of years ago, we found ourselves sitting around at headquarters in Mumbai, thinking about this business of should TCS, which basically does most of its software delivery out of India, should it think of opening up a major presence in Latin America. Obviously, you can see from this slide what the outcome to that decision was. They currently have 7,500 IT employees in Latin America, and my guess is that within 2 years it will cross the 10,000 mark. But it's interesting not so much for the achievements on the ground, but for the factors that it highlights as being relevant to this kind of decision. So why did this proposal even come up? It came up because there were some large global deals in this space that also required an ability to service the client's need in Latin America. I'm thinking particularly of a bank known as ABN AMRO, which has since been reconstituted, but which was the big entry point for TCS into Latin America. The big problem that we faced is Latin America per capita income levels are low, but Indian per capita income levels were lower. So the first time I saw this proposal, I literally had a fit because I was saying, come on, you're going to destroy the whole cost structure of the company by doing this. And then we started to think a little bit more broadly, it was mostly them rather than me, about what the other gains were that might carry TCS into a new geography, even if the cost levels there were higher than what they could achieve back home in India. First point was, of course, we were taking a very static look at it by comparing Indian software employee levels with current Latin American levels. If you look at the 15–20% annual increases in India for the salaries of software employees, you start to realize that taking a static look at costs and making a decision on that basis is probably not the right idea. Thirdly, we realize that there's a whole differentiation side to things that isn't picked up in costs. So clear language advantages. Why did ABN AMRO want work for its Iberian subsidiaries done out of Latin America? Why does Banco Santander want that? Has to do with some sense that it's probably better if the people doing the software programming speak the same language and can interact directly with the client. Another differentiation advantage. Lots of clients were telling us they wanted their services in the same time zone for ease of communication, particularly true of business process outsourcing, where you have ongoing operational issues that may require immediate resolution. And third, from a TCS perspective, well, major problem that they'd had in making even more headway in the market was this dismissal, oh, they're just an India-based operation. There was a commercial case to be made that coming across as more global was going to help win more of these global kinds of deals. So here's some factors that arguably increase customer willingness to pay, or at least customer willingness to give TCS the business. Then there were considerations of industry structure, which at least didn't supply a comprehensive set of barriers. The major Western competitors not very focused on this market, arguably, and there was this sense that TCS might be able to get ahead of Indian rivals. There was the notion of reducing risk. I think that back when we were taking this decision, tensions between India and Pakistan had again increased, and that was certainly a little bit of a perspective to bring to bear on the decision. Wouldn't it be nice to start to have some kind of ways of balancing the fact that all of a sudden a lot of clients are deferring their visits to India prior to concluding any contracts? And then finally, this is the part that I want to focus on, and then I'll wrap up. There was a whole set of ways in which this generated resources for the organization. The first resource was in terms of buzz. So Thomas Friedman, the journalist from whom that quote that most of you, the plurality of you went for, Tom's written several columns in the New York Times about TCS Latin America. And while the substance of the argument misses out on all the local differences that caused TCS to set up shop there, still TCS is very happy for the publicity to be talked about in 3 columns in the New York Times. Second, multiculturalism. Here's a company that has 90% of its business outside India,